Hello there.
Keith, good to see you again.
It's funny, every time I go to our recordings as I'm uploading them to YouTube and I listen to myself say hello, and it's like, damn, I hate the way I sound.
I think one of the hardest things to do is to listen or watch yourself.
Yeah, I've
It's a
always had a
really
problem.
difficult uh, situation to embark on because when we do that, we're so self-conscious of ourselves, or we say, really, that's the way I sound?
I
Because that's
know,
not the way I hear myself. So,
I know, and you wonder if people are like saying, wow, these guys are weird.
well, I'm sure they're saying that, but
That's okay. As long as they enjoy the content, they can think,
exactly. Yeah, they get something out of it. Right.
yeah. So I we're always talking about the topics that we want to discuss. So the one thing that I think would be really good to discuss is leadership. And I know that's something that you have as part of your coaching that you do for business
Right.
owners.
Yeah.
And I wrote an article a while back to which really dealt with whether leaders are born or made. You know,
Mhm.
is it nature or nurture? Do you have leadership qualities from, you know, the birth from through your DNA, or is it something that you learn? So I wanted to really get your perspective because this is something you do. You coach people on how to become better leaders. So what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, thanks, Keith. I think when you talk about whether they're born or made, I know they talk about people being born leaders, and there, to some extent, there is some of that, but I think leadership is something that can absolutely be taught and learned and developed. And in fact, I think it has to be. Nobody becomes a great leader without practicing good leadership skills. I mean, it just doesn't happen naturally. And it comes to some people more natural than others, but I'm a firm believer that really anybody can learn to be a better leader. Maybe they'll never be, considered a great leader, but they can be considered an effective leader, and they can develop the skills that are necessary to be an effective leader. And I think it's really a good topic because I think in today's day and age, leadership is something we need. People respond to it, and there's so much poor leadership out there that I think it's the difference between companies being successful or failing in a lot of cases. Yes, there can be technical issues that they fail on, like their product isn't that good, or they're in the wrong market, or that sort of thing. But all of that really gets back to leadership.
Yeah, well, yeah, because I mean, leadership, when you think of the word leadership, you think of someone that's at the helm, that's making all the decisions, that's pointing people in the right direction. But leadership is more than just that. Leadership is part of, you have to make decisions as a leader. So, are you a great leader of people has a lot more to it than just, that you're a strong personality. Because you can be a strong personality, but be a terrible manager of people. So, you could lead with strength, or at least it appears you're leading with strength, but your decision making is poor. Are you consistent in your messaging to your employees? You
Yeah.
know, one day
It,
you're saying one thing, the next day, you're saying something else, or you're saying different things to different people. So,
or you're not saying anything at all.
or not anything at all. So, in your experience, did you find early in your career that you had natural leadership skills, or was it something that you needed to grow into?
I would say a little of both. You know, I felt like I was comfortable, having the leadership skills, but I had to develop them. I had to work on them. I had to make some mistakes with regard to leadership, early in my career when I was running teams, like departments, I think I made a lot of mistakes. Um, and you learn from those things. I mean, to me, that's how you become a better leader, is you lead, you see the effect your leadership has on people, situations, outcomes, and then you start making adjustments based on that.
So,
I think, Keith, one thing I think is really interesting is I think back to, like you said, early in my career, what leadership looked like, and now what you see when you talk about good leadership. And I think it has definitely changed. I mean, I think, when early in my career, I think there was a lot of what companies thought good leaders did was they told people what to do, they directed them. Where today, I think you get a lot more. So as a leader, you were pushing. Today, I think a lot of leaders, good leaders, effective leaders, are pulling, right? They're pulling people along. They're not pushing them to do something. And they do a lot better job of communication. They do a lot better job of understanding culture. They do good leaders today, I think, listen much better than again, early in my career. I don't think a good listener was considered a good leader, a leadership trait. Where today, I think it's really, really important to be a good listener, to hear what your employees, what your customers are saying, and react to it, respond to it, uh, ask more questions about what it is that their concerns are.
yeah, it's interesting you talk about the push-pull, and the pushing part, I think it is, even though I think there is more pulling today, you have to know when to push. And again,
Mhm.
pushing part, the ability to push properly comes from experience.
Yes.
You have to be able to, and I say this is because that's very much to do with my sales skills. You have to know how to read people. If you see somebody is not performing, okay, that they've had a sudden mood change, they seem very unhappy. Part of your job as a leader is to recognize that, because people generally, if they've had success in the past under your leadership and tutelage, if they are going down in a wrong direction, something happened. Okay. Many times it's nothing to do with the business. It could have something to do with what's happening in their personal life.
Right.
It may be an illness. It may be a parent that's not well, a child that's not well. So today you have to be much more attuned to an employee's overall life and personality, where years ago it was like, hey, I'm the boss. Okay, you got a job to do. I don't care what's happening in your family, your friends.
Right.
You're here right now. You do what you're supposed to do.
Just do what I tell you.
It just doesn't, that doesn't work anymore. It
But
doesn't.
Keith, and Keith, I think I want to make a distinction here is, when we talk about this push-pull, that to me is different from setting high expectations and high standards. As a leader, you should set high expectations. You should expect greatness from your employees. I think the difference is, again, you don't just put those goals and objectives out there and then walk away as a leader. You start working with your team to help them accomplish those goals, to take away the barriers that might be getting in their way of doing great work, as opposed to just kind of leaving them on their own and saying, okay, now you figure it out.
Yeah, so it's so different than when we were, in our 20s and employed, or
Right.
in my case, as an early employer, that's basically, there was a lot of ego involved, I'm the boss. There was not a lot of talk about, even though you saw people's moods and actions and you had to respond to that. I wasn't mature enough or uh just, I didn't have enough self-awareness to see the kinds of things that affect employees, uh, you know, um, their work, their successes,
Yeah.
and today I think, and teaching leadership today is just totally different. I mean, if the things that you're teaching today, that 30 years ago, they would have laughed at you.
Right.
What do you mean
Right.
you talk to your employees about things that may be personal? I mean, and even now you got to be careful because, there's certain things you're not allowed to do.
But I think what you're saying is taking an interest in them as people, as opposed to that they're just workers, right?
Right.
And the old school might have been that, as you just said, you kind of know them for the job that they do, but you don't know them personally. Where today, I think, strong leaders, again, they don't get necessarily into their employees' personal lives, but they ask them how they're doing. They want to know if there is something going on and they do want to talk about it, or maybe there's something going on and they don't want to talk about it to you, but as a leader, you recognize that and you figure out, right? Hey, we've got some, you know what? If there's something going on in your personal life and you don't want to tell me, we've got places you can go. We've got resources for you to help you get through that. And it doesn't have to be that you have to come to the boss and be, kind of lay all your your issues out on the table, your personal issues. But maybe as a leader, you've set up an EAP system, a EAP where employees have resources they can go to that are indiscriminate. So they're not things that anyone's going to find out about because most EAPs are actually set up so that they're separate from the company. It's the actual EAP company that's running it, not your own company. So none of what you talk about is getting back to folks in the company. And that's just an example.
No, that's a very good point. And, you can be caring without being intrusive.
Exactly.
You
Exactly.
can show that you're empathetic,
Yeah.
okay, that, you understand, listen, we all have bad days, and you show them that you still value them, even if they haven't been performing at a level that you're used to as a leader, and it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And you could say something to make someone feel really good. Say, look, I know you. I know the kind of work you've done, and lately there's something not working. Is it something within the organization that's causing this problem? If it's personal, that's not my business, and we do have resources for that. But uh, what's going on? I mean, you have to be able to communicate with your staff, okay?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you really have to embrace them. And when you see even the word employees, it doesn't really allow someone to feel like they're part of your team. Employee, employer. Think about that from the
Right.
dynamic. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, employers up here, employees down here. You're not going to be a great leader if people will go, oh, there's my boss. It's like, oh, the boss is coming. It's like,
Right.
so
Right. Yeah.
it's so,
Yeah.
you know what I'm
That's so
talking
well
about.
said about how, I think in when I was first starting in my career, I think you're right. Leaders were someone to be feared.
Yeah.
And now I think today effective leaders now are ones that we want to go and talk to because we value what they have to say because they do listen. They're empathetic. They demonstrate that, hey, I understand why you haven't, like you said before, why you haven't maybe worked up to your potential. And if it is something within the work environment, within the organization, let's work on changing that. And if it's not, and if it's something outside of work, let's figure out how to get you help for that.
Yeah, and this really, again, is part of leadership, is having the key people on your leadership team that have specific roles that relate to the different areas of your business, because you can't, as an effective leader, be everywhere. But
No,
you need people who are in specific areas. So an HR department, you have a operations department, you have a sales department. Now, even though they're separate departments, they're all part of the wheel.
yeah,
So if
yeah,
one spoke's not working, okay, it affects everything.
absolutely, right. You're only as strong as your weakest link. You know, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link.
Yeah.
So that's very true. And we've talked about that before when we've talked about, you know, sales and operations and finance. You know, those three areas that really need to be integrated with each other, because if one is falling down, it's going to impact the others.
Yeah, and you know, it's interesting because I equate a business to like a body. You know, we have all these different parts that have to work in sync. You know, so if you're having a leg problem, it could affect, you know, your left leg, all of a sudden you're paining your right hip. It's like, well, why is that? Oh, okay, so there's a weakness. When there's a weakness in one area, it could affect every area, you know,
Exactly.
and so
Exactly.
again, we're going towards like great leaders understand how to manage people.
Yeah. How to get the most out of them.
Yeah.
But I think, like you said a few minutes ago, Keith, it's still incumbent upon the leader to make decisions, direct the organization, guide people. You know, just because some of the things we're talking about doesn't mean as a leader you can now be wishy-washy or go to the team and say, oh, well, what do you guys think we should do? It's like, no, that's not what we're talking about here. We're still talking about, you know, as the leader, you still have to have the presence of being the leader. You have to understand that all eyes are on you, um, and that your actions, your words, all of that plays into the perception people have of you as a leader. So, you know, as an example, maybe many years ago, a leader would kind of just make a decision based on their own knowledge, and that's what the organization would do. They'd carry it out. Where today, I would say an effective leader now is listening to their employees, is understanding who's impacted by a decision they're about to make. They're listening to customers, they're listening to vendors, but then they're making the decision. So it's not a case of saying you can, you know, abdicate decision making because of this, you know, kind of softer, gentler leader. You still have to be the decision maker and be willing to live with the decisions you make and be accountable to the rest of your organization.
No question. So in your experience and with working with clients, what do you think the biggest problem with or biggest reasons that leaders fail?
I would say the number one reason is communication skills, whether that be their ability to communicate with employees or customers, their ability to listen. I know I have run into a lot of leaders who are really challenged by their ability to listen. They want to talk first. They want to solve the problem before they really know what the problem is. I think that gets leaders in trouble. I always tell uh, leaders that they should really be the last ones to speak, not the first ones. Okay, so if you're sitting with your executive team and there's an issue, let everybody else comment first.
Mhm.
You're the leader. You're ultimately going to make the decision. But when you speak up first, now you've kind of skewed the thought process, right? Now your team has kind of heard your thoughts, and are they going to be as open as they would be now that they've heard you speak? Why not go last and hear everybody else's perspective on the issue, and then you get to share your perspective, and ultimately, as the leader, you make the decision. But now you've heard everything. Now you've gotten perspective from not just you, but others, a finance perspective, a sales perspective, an operations perspective, an HR perspective. You're going to make a lot more effective decisions if you hear all of that, and that all goes into your decision-making process, as opposed to you sit there and hear the problem, and 2 minutes later you say, well, this is what we're going to do. And everybody else sits around the table and says, oh, okay, tell me what to do then. It's just not an effective method for building a strong and successful organization.
No, I agree with you 100%, because yeah, it's like everything else, you need all that information to make a decision.
Yes.
If you don't hear from everybody and get their perspective and allow for open dialogue and disagreement, that's another area that there are a lot of leaders that they go, it's my way or the highway.
Right.
It's like, it's very old school, and it's not effective leadership. I don't believe even 30 years ago was effective leadership.
No.
I don't think you inspire people to really do their best when you shut them down and don't listen. You
Yeah.
still make the decision. You're the again, you're the leader, you're the boss. But at the end of the day, if you got everybody's input, okay, at least you'll value each of them, appreciate that they've given you some perspective. At the end of the day, great leaders hear before they speak.
I totally agree.
Yes. So,
I think the other thing is where leaders kind of fall down is they don't trust their team enough. And so they don't want to ask them those questions, because they're concerned about what kind of response they're going to get. So they'll actually ask leading questions, right? Almost like lawyers, right? They want a certain answer, so they'll ask the question in a certain way to get the answer that they want, as opposed to, again, asking your questions in a much more objective way, so that they can give a real open and honest answer, as opposed to answering a leading question. And again, it's because the one thing you don't want to do as a leader is manipulate people, or be seen as somebody who manipulates people, right? All of a sudden you're starting to lose your credibility and your integrity as a leader. So
another area, and I'm sure you could speak to this as well, is as a leader, you need to be consistent.
yeah, I think that's another really important attribute for an effective leader is consistent and objective as a leader, right? If from a consistency standpoint, I think it's really important for an organization to see that they see you act consistently, like, hey, I'm always going to listen to our customers and really take that feedback and do something with it, right? So I'm consistent about listening to my customers, getting that feedback, and then doing something with it. I'm consistent with how I deal with, performance issues. Right? If you treat one person differently from another, and they both are having performance issues, it's going to start causing the organization to sort of like, yin and yang, right? To zig and zag. They don't know what leader is going to show up on Tuesday mornings versus Wednesday afternoon.
Yeah,
So I think it's really important to be consistent, to be, you know, I think there's a lot of leaders out there who get really emotional, and I think that's just a part of them, but to tone that emotion down, and again, be more objective, listen, deal with the issue as opposed to the emotions that that issue might be creating, or the individuals who are talking about it. Now, it doesn't mean you don't have particular people in your organization who you might say, hey, this is really my go-to person when it comes to operations. And maybe you put more emphasis on their feedback, but you still hear the others who are talking, and you hear all of their concerns, their questions, their responses to what you're asking.
yeah, and this is where really good training comes in.
Yeah.
When you have a philosophy in your business of how the business operates, not just in one area, but across the board, here's what we do to make a customer happy.
Yeah.
Here's how we develop, our delivery system. Here's how we deal with, a problem that comes up, our customer service department. That's where consistency comes from, is that you actually provide not only in writing, but you actually have training on these things. And really good companies with good leadership, I believe, actually exhibit those kinds of traits.
I totally agree. I think you have, you were talking about consistency, and you say, as a leader, if you make sure that we have processes in place within each of our departments, that's going to increase consistency, right? Because now if I have processes in place, I just have to make sure everybody's following the same process. I don't have to go out and recreate it each and every time, or interpret the situation that's going on. I can just go to, well, what's our process for that? What's our process for, customer service? What's our order processing
Yeah,
process look like? What's our inventory control process look like? We're either following it or we aren't following it. And if we aren't following it, why not? What's going on? Now, again, there you've kind of added to your consistency, because you're going back to company policy and procedure, as opposed to, how I'm feeling today and dealing with an issue based on that.
yeah, it's if an employee or a team member has to worry every time they make a decision, whether it's right or wrong, or is it going to be different, the response to what I did? Is it going to be challenged because, I did it different? If you have policies and procedures, it's very simple. If, in my world, the customer was always right. Okay. And it's hard to live by that, because there are times when the customer, literally is wrong, but
Right.
they still have to be right, because
Yeah.
there's too much that you could lose by not making a customer happy, in terms of not just losing them. We've talked about the loss of family members and friends and future business and referrals. But if you don't have a consistent policy of how to make somebody happy, like if this happens, just give a refund or give an exchange. I mean, this is why companies have, and I'm talking retail now, but it could be,
Right.
service business as well. It's like the customer needs to be made happy. Okay. You need to find out, first find out what happened, what's wrong. They have to even know how to ask the questions to determine how to solve the problem. So, I mean, we could talk for hours on this subject, because it's really, this is where a lot of companies fail. I mean, they do not have good leadership, and they don't have policies and procedures in all areas of their business, so that people that are coming into the work environment understand this is how we do things.
And I think, just to take that up one level from there, Keith, is not just policies and procedures, but the values. Like, what are the company's values? And I think, as you're saying, like, I'm going to guess in the company that you ran, one of your values was, we're going to satisfy the customer. They're going to leave here satisfied. As an employee, if I know that that is a value of yours, it makes decision making so much easier. Because now all of a sudden, am I going to let this customer walk out of Keith's store unhappy? No, because what Keith's number one value is that I want satisfied customers each and every time, not once in a while, not most of the time, each and every time. So now as an employee, boy, it makes my job a lot easier. Now I might, maybe there's something to talk about there in terms of, what I have to do to get them to be satisfied, to be happy. But I would think in that situation, you would pat an employee on the back and say, you know what, you took a unhappy customer, and yes, you cost us money because you gave them something, you discounted them, you did something, but they walked out of here happy, and that's what I want.
I always looked at that as ROI positive. Because again, there's that domino effect of what one unhappy customer can do to your business. Everyone
Right.
always, oh, good riddance. They were horrible. It's like, I can't deal with them. The best person to satisfy is the loudest screamer. Because it's just as soon as they'll scream that you're terrible, your service was horrible, they will also like just totally tell everybody, oh, I go to that place, they're so nice. I had a problem, they solved my problem. Nobody else ever did that for me. And it's like, so you have a real opportunity. You can go one way or the other, okay, when making a decision.
Right.
What you said is so true. It's the philosophy, and it all starts with leadership.
When you've got those core values set as a leader, now you can hire people who share those core values. And I'm not saying, it may not be an exact match, but you can use your core values now to hire people who are aligned with your core values. And again, that just means they're going to do the right thing, whatever that is from a core value standpoint. And it's just much easier situation to manage and build a company around if everyone's sharing in those core values. And again, it makes the employee's job a lot easier because they don't have to guess how you're feeling on a certain day. They just live by your core values.
And you could easily, as a customer, okay, know those core values without even asking, because I've walked into businesses and the people look miserable. They didn't greet me like in a timely manner. And I've had the opposite. You walk in and say, hey, how are you? Everyone's happy. And it's like, wow, you must have a really good work environment here, because everyone's always happy. And
Yeah.
that's so important, because who wants to deal with grumpy people?
When a few minutes ago, we talked about consistency, right? So you, as a leader, you set these core values. Maybe you do it through an exercise with your leadership team, but you've identified your core values, you've written them down. And now as you share those with your employees, as long as you live by those, right, that's being consistent. And again, it goes back to now employees know what's expected of them. Customers can know what to expect from your business. I think you were talking before about mistakes leaders make. There's nothing worse than a leader who sets certain values and then doesn't live by them. Right? That's
Yeah.
just not the right thing to do, because now you see you always see companies post their mission or their values in their front office, and you walk in and you look at those values, and then you look around the office and you say, or the facility or whatever, they're not living by their values. Those are just words on a wall. They're not really, they have safety on there as some reference to safety within their core values. And then you walk through their manufacturing facility and the place is a mess and nobody's wearing their protective gear, and You know, it's like, okay, all they did was put a word on that, or with some words on a piece of paper. They're not living by them. And that goes back to that consistency
And core values. I mean, it's,
and core values.
but you know, what you say and what you do have to align. You
Yeah,
know, you can't say one thing and do something else. And it's funny, I remember as a kid, this, and this was not good, what I'm about to say, that my father would say something, because obviously I was a smart ass. And I would, if my father, you know, if I did something that I was reprimanded for, and I said to my father, well, Dad, you do that. And he would go, don't do as I do as I say do. And I would say what? And it's like, and that's really very old school. I mean, it's really, that comes from this sense of like, I'm your dad, that's why, or I'm your boss, that's what. We don't live in that world anymore. It's a very different world. I can't, I'm not even gonna say what's better or it's worse, but when it comes to pure leadership, okay, we live in a very, very different world because, you know, the kids are exposed to so much more today. They grow
right.
up in a different environment. They know more, they know it earlier in their life. They see a lot of things that are not good. And they have a lot of, you think about role models. Role models are no longer just mom and dad or a teacher or a coach. Your role models, you're looking at a video online, some influencer that you know may be totally off the wall, but you fall in love with what they are and what they're saying because they have, you know, 5 million followers. So I'm really sounding old now. It's just like,
Isn't it interesting though how we talk about leadership, and you talk about the role of a parent, which a lot of people can relate to. And just like we were saying about how leadership has changed in business over the years, think of how parenting has changed over the years, right? Your
yeah,
dad,
the
my
kids are
dad,
funny.
they told us to do something and we did it, right?
Oh, I was
There was
great.
no discussion. There was, we
No,
didn't gather
there was
around
a
the
fear
table and
factor.
say, well, what time is bedtime going to be for Greg? No, Dad said 8:30, you go to bed, or 9 o'clock because you got a little bit older. And there was no discussion, there was no, right? And today as a parent, you know, and today, and again, I don't know what's better or worse. It is what it is, and that's what the world we live in. And as leaders, we need to understand that.
Right. And that's part of education. That's part of willingness to listen, you know, and yeah, I mean, this is a subject that we could talk about more and more because it really, I mean, what we do in coaching is to teach people how to improve specific skills. Leadership is probably one of the top skills,
Right,
you know, because
right,
you can be a great salesperson, but a terrible leader, you shouldn't be in a leadership position.
right.
So you wouldn't become a management, you'd be a salesperson. That's where you are best suited.
Yep.
And part of leadership is to know and put people in the best place to succeed. Those are decisions that you have to make as a leader.
But I think, like you're saying, Keith, a lot of times we promote within our organization, you know, the best salesperson to sales manager, the best production person to production supervisor, you know, the best accountant to controller or CFO. Well, those are very different skills if you're sitting and leading people as opposed to doing the work. And that's where I think, you know, I'm not saying you don't promote that way. You can, but you better give your employees the tools then to understand now that they aren't doers anymore. Now they're managers and leaders. And again, that's where I think whether it's a coach or supervisor training or manager training, it's really important to get your folks the appropriate training because their roles now are completely different from what they used to be. Managers, leaders, supervisors don't do the same thing as, you know, production workers, the accounting team. You know, you're not doing the work, you're making sure the work gets done. So it's a different perspective. And again, it's a place where I think training is absolutely necessary.
Yeah, and it's interesting, you talk about, being elevated in a position. I remember, and we always talk sports, but I'm a football fan, and I'm a Jet fan, unfortunately. And I remember we had an offensive coordinator back in the early 80s, Joe Walton, great offensive coordinator. Okay. And he always wore his hat backwards. I'll never forget that. They made him the head coach that 1 year, and he failed miserably. As a head coach, you are responsible for every area of the team in terms of its performance. The offense, the defense, the offensive line, the defensive line, special teams. I mean, all the different facets of a football team. And some people have what it takes to become great coaches because they have the skill set to begin with, okay, to manage multiple areas. And they were good, not teachers, they were good learners. They listened to everything. You see a guy like Bill Belichick, who started as a defensive coordinator. I mean, he started really, he was at the bottom of the barrel when he was in college football and coaching. But he became what he became because he made it his business to understand every facet of football and all the different areas. So, yeah,
I think that's a great analogy. When you think about coaches in sports and specifically in football, right? There's coaches who are coaching very specific skills, tight ends, linebackers, offensive line. Then you get your coaches who are managing the offense, right? Those are different skills from coaching the offensive line. But to be a head coach, you're right. It's really more about leadership and making sure that you've got the right people in place to coach all those different areas, because you're not going to coach all of them areas, right? A head coach in football doesn't run the offense and the defense and the special teams. They have assistant coaches who do that.
Yeah.
And it's so as a leader, you're not, now you're not even, not only are you not doing the role, you're not even managing the role. Somebody else is managing that role and you're managing that person. So I think that's,
this is really like important because he left the position he was great at. Okay.
yeah.
And by the way, the leadership was ownership. So you talk about, and general manager, who's picking the coach. So the general manager made a bad decision. They were so afraid of losing him because his reputation as an offensive coordinator was unbelievable that they didn't want to lose him. So instead, they fired their coach and they moved him up to head coach. Well, they think hard enough and really explore whether he had what it takes. Because if he didn't have what it takes, it wouldn't matter if he left to be somebody else's head coach.
Right. Right. Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right. So
Well, again, that's something we could talk about for hours, but
oh yes,
I
sports.
see our time is
But I
is
want,
running short.
as we leave this week, what do you think the big takeaway is for someone who's starting a business today who doesn't have experience and maybe doesn't have leadership skills? What do you think they should do to try to hone that particular skill or learn about that?
Yeah, again, my advice would be, figure out where you're at, sort of on the leadership spectrum. Figure out what your strengths are, your weaknesses are. Maybe you do an assessment, but you find that as a sitting in a leadership role, you've probably got some things you are good at, right? But you've got some things that are weaknesses, and I think it's important to understand that, not feel insecure about that, because right, you're starting a new business, you're sitting in that leadership role, you've got some employees working for you, let's say. It's important to think about developing your leadership skills. Again, whether you do that through online training, whether you do that because you like to read and you read leadership books, or you hire somebody like a coach to help you develop your leadership skills. Whatever the right answer is for you personally, and how you go about learning. But I think to assume just because now you own the company that you're going to be a good leader, I think you definitely have to develop those skills over time, work on them, hone them, practice them, get feedback on them from your employees or third party, and really work to improve yourself as a leader.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I agree with that. I think it's important that you get mentorship in whatever way you can because you can't teach experience. I mean, that's just something that'll happen over time.
Right.
And we all started from somewhere, whether we were terrible leaders to begin with, or whether we saw ourselves as great leaders, but learned along the way that maybe I wasn't as good as I thought.
Well, I think that's one of the things I know I've been able to do as a coach, Keith, is I can help leaders identify where their areas of improvement are for, opportunities for improvement, and help them see through through an objective viewpoint, sort of how their actions, their words are impacting employees. And those are the things we talk about. Hey, here was a situation where you did X, you said Y. Do you think, looking back on it now, would you have done that any differently? Is there something else you could have said or done? Well, yeah, maybe I could have involved my employees a little bit more in that decision because it affected them, and I just, kind of went off and made the decision on my own, as an example.
No, that's a good example. So on that note, I want to thank you for another good week of discussion on a great topic. And we have July 4th tomorrow.
Yes.
So
Always one of my favorite holidays.
yeah, mine too. Barbecue
time. Yeah. Well, and a chance to realize we are very fortunate to live in the country we live in. We have a lot of challenges as a country, but we should take tomorrow to really reflect on what this country has meant to us and to the entire world.
100%. So on that note, that was a beautiful way to end, and I will see you next week.
Enjoy your weekend, Keith.
You too. Thanks, Greg.